So today I'm going to walk through setting up server-side tagging for GTM. Now, I've not done this before, I've not read much about it, so this is going to be my first attempt at it, but obviously I've been working with GTM for many years now, and working with GCP as well. How this is going to go, I've absolutely no idea, because again, I haven't done it before. So let's give this a go, let's see how easy it is and what the benefits are. So before we begin, let's give you a very brief overview of what server-side tracking is all about. This is a diagram of a traditional way of doing things. Let me open this up in a new tab for you so you can see it. Now, traditionally, what used to happen is you put your GTM snippet onto your website. So this is the white box with the dotted border. And when the website loads, it makes a call to Google Tag Manager code, and Google Tag Manager loads the appropriate JavaScript onto the page, all of the tags that you've configured in the interface. But then those tags execute within the browser, and they send data to the various platforms. So if you created a Google Ads tag, that would be sitting in the browser and send data to Google Ads. If you created a GA tag, that would send data to Google Analytics. Now this is all fine and well, but the downside is essentially you're still loading all of these 3 different tags onto the site. Some developers sometimes have issues with that. They may think it's slowing down the page, the page weight is larger, so maybe that isn't a good idea. It's work, these tags are tiny in weight, but you never know, it could have some influence on performance. Now, okay, so let's look at what the server-side version of this looks like. So here's the server-side version. So you can see the main difference here is you've got the GTM container, but the GTM container only has 1 tag in it. So we've now no longer got those 3 tags, we've just got the 1 tag. And when this GTM container loads, what it's going to do is going to send the data when appropriate to your server. It's going to send it to the client, and the client is another GTM container running in your Google Cloud platform. And then that decides to execute tags based on rules you've set up and send them to the appropriate downstream tools. So essentially what we've done is we've moved the sending of the data from the client directly to Google Ads or to any downstream tools. Instead, we're just sending it to one place in the cloud, and then the cloud sends it on. So advantages, you've now only got 1 tag in GTM in the browser to load, so potentially we get some speeded performance, but unless you're loading hundreds of tags onto the site, I don't think that'll be very much. But the second thing is, now I guess it's harder to block, because if we change this domain, if we changed our client to be sitting at something like analytics.mydomain.com, or we could even disguise it more by not calling it analytics, we could call it data.client.com. There's no real way for an ad blocker to block that. Well, there is, but they can't go and put in a filter in their software to block every single person's domain, because it's just going to stop people. It's not going to really even allow you to load up that domain name, right? So by doing this, I'm assuming you're going to get more accurate data, because less people are going to be able to block your tags. Now, will it change cookies? A lot of people that I hear talk about server-side tracking, they're like, oh, this is great, it gets around the cookie loss, and the fact that Apple are now starting to block cookies, and Safari is starting to block cookies with intelligent tracking prevention. And I don't know about that. I would have to do more digging. I would have to understand where the GA cookie is being set. I mean, I'm guessing that GA still is setting a cookie somewhere on your browser, because the only other way it could be doing is identifying your browser with a unique, hashing together, I don't know, your operating system and a few other things to come up with a unique identifier for you. But people have tried that in the past and it hasn't really worked. So I need to do a bit of digging to see if this server-side setup will actually help with ITP. I'm not sure it will at this stage, but I'm 50-50. I'm 50-50 on the matter. So I'll look at that in a bit, but that's the general concept. So you've now moved to a case where the server container running in your cloud is the thing that's sending data on. And I'm guessing one of the other advantages of having all this is you've now got more transparency. Not only would you be able to potentially change the code in the client to do some funky stuff, so you could potentially route the data into your own databases. Any data that's coming through to the client, you could in theory pipe straight to BigQuery or pipe to one of your own servers. I think that would be an advantage. You could do better logging. There's a whole host of advantages why moving this in this direction is good. And as I've said before, kind of CDPs are already doing this, but and a few tag managers in the past used to do it. I believe it was either Insighton or BrightTag, one of those two. Did this about 5-6 years ago, and it didn't really catch on. So I'm curious to see where it's going. I think it is an improvement. I think because Google's got such massive market share now, they will probably be able to push this through, and especially with if it does have an impact on ITP, that'll be useful as well. So we'll see. But that is the gist of where we are going. So let's start. I'm going to create a new container within my account. I'm going to select server side here, and let's see what this gives me. All right, so instantly, let's have a read. We get to provision a tagging server. Now, my understanding of server-side tracking is that, of course, you still put the GTM container code on your website. That then is JavaScript, obviously. Whenever something happens on the site, it sends it to the Google servers, and then the Google servers send it on to your Google Cloud Platform tagging server, whatever you set up. Now, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to go with automatically provision one. I've already set up my GCP account. I'm imagining if you don't have a GCP account, you will have to create one and set this up. But because I've got it, we'll just use my one here that we've got. All right, so we've got the details of our server that has been set up on GCP. Great. That probably took about 2 minutes from end to end. I might trim this video so you don't have to see it, but it took about 2 minutes. Oh, actually, I can just click here. Let's see what it's created for me. Okay, so this looks like a project. So it's given the project the name of the container. That is handy because, as you can see, sometimes project names get a bit messy, and if you get what's what. So let's have a look. Okay, so what it looks like it's done is it's created an app engine and it's created a storage bucket. Let's have a look at the storage bucket first. Again, as I said, I've not done this before. I don't know how GTM does server-side tracking. I'm familiar with CDPs, which do server-side tracking, things like Exponia, Segment, and so on and so forth. But I haven't done it with the Tag Manager yet. So it looks like we've got one bucket set up here. We've got containers, images. Interesting. Okay, so not quite sure what these are. These are probably, I'm not sending any data to this yet, so I'm not sure why this has data in it at the moment. But presumably, obviously you don't need to know all this stuff. I'm just curious, just showing you guys around what I can see. And we've got App Engine. Let's have a look at App Engine. Again, I don't think there'll be anything spectacular that we can see here. It'll just literally be showing us the server that we've got set up now, where all our hits are going to be coming into. And that's interesting. Probably that happens because there's some permission errors on, not errors, but there's the way the server has been set up is probably been set up in a very secure way so that you can't access it through a normal web browser, which would be absolutely what you want to do. So nothing wrong with that. And I can see it's running on Node 10, standard environment. It's serving, it's call testing. Not much else that I can tell you, really. just that there is a server there waiting to do something. I was hoping I'd be able to have a look at the code perhaps, but no joy from what I can see just yet. All right, everyone, we are back with this first look. I've been looking at the documentation, had a quick look, and it's becoming clearer to me what the purpose of the server-side tracking is. And I think the bit that I was confused with, that may confuse some people, is it appears you need 2 containers. So you have your typical container, which I have here, which I have on my website called Impressive Self. It's a fake website, it's not a real website, but it's the one I use to test. And this GTM container is on that website. It's just the same as a normal GTM container. Nothing special about it. You'll see if I'm refreshing the page, you're seeing, well, I'm not in preview mode, let's put it in preview mode, and you'll see this is exactly the same as before. We're in debug mode, we get the debug window, and you can see all the events firing as appropriate. What's different though is, well, actually, let's just show you in Omnibug. So Omnibug is the debugging tool I like to use. Now what you'll notice is that normally you would see the events, right? We've had a page view fired, we've had a viewed product list event fired, but we're not seeing those in the console. Why is that? It's because now they are being intercepted, and instead of being sent by the browser to the Google servers, it is being intercepted and sent server to server. So how did I set that up? Well, the first thing was you go into your variables and you go into your GA settings. And what you want to do is under advanced configurations, you come down, you want to put in the URL. This is the URL that, remember, we set up right at the beginning. This is the URL of our second GTM container, which is the server-side tracking container. Okay, so you've now got 2 GTM containers, the one normal one, which you probably already have on your website, and then the second one, which is the new server-side tracking one, which you saw me set up at the beginning of this video. And if you have a look under admin, let's go to, where was it, container settings. You can see the URL here, and that's the URL that I imagine when we looked at the documentation, they want us to change to analytics in my case, .impressiveself.com, which you can do through your DNS settings, but I'm not going to go into that. For the moment though, you just need to copy this out and you need to paste it into your transport URL there. All right, now once you've done that, you preview this or publish it, and we're also going to put our server-side test into preview mode, and I'm going to show you some interesting things that happen. First of all, unlike the traditional preview mode, the server-side tracking preview mode happens as you'd expect server-side, because you can't see the events happening in the front end. So everything's going to happen in this window here. So just to remind you, I've got my standard GTM container, which is on the website. I've got the server-side tracking GTM container, which I haven't put onto the website. This is almost a cloud-based container, but I have put this URL of this container into my GA settings of this, this container. So now anything that happens on my website, this GTM container, rather than executing them in the browser, is going to send the data to that server-side tracking URL. So let's do a refresh, and not of GA, of the website even. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the website. We've got, as you can see, a couple of things firing, viewed product list event and a page view. And I'm going to head over to the server-side tracking that we enabled, the debug mode of the server side, and you can see I've got a couple of events have come in. So we've got the page view and we've got the viewed product list. So both of those are coming in fine. And if I look in the events panel of my actual data, you can see we've got them there. So just to show you that again, I'm going to refresh this. You'll see nothing is being sent browser side, but we get an event in there and it's flagged up. So our server-side tracking is now working. I'm going to show you a couple of things that I had to do within the server-side tracking to set these up. So first of all, you've got a couple of things called clients. It looks like clients are the source of the data, right, where this data is coming from. But not only that, it's kind of the mechanism by which the data gets here. So we've got app and web, we've got universal analytics. I'm imagining you'll be able to add more in the future. There's only 3 now: measurement protocol, app and web, and universal analytics. I can imagine them, Google, if they're heading down trying to become a customer data platform route, then they may start adding in additional client types here. So we can send this data to more than just Google Analytics, but we'll see what they do in the future. So those were set up for me by default. They seem to be set up when you create this container, so nothing to do there. But what I had to do is that with the default server-side container, I was firing all these events from the standard GTM container to the server-side container, but none of that data was getting passed on to analytics. So you have to almost create a route. Think of it as a black box. All this data is flowing into the server-side tracking, but you need to decide if you want to pass that data on to your downstream tools. And I did a couple of things. I basically set up a tag that said, I want you to pass, again, this is my view having looked at this for about 15 minutes, so forgive me if some things are not correct here, but this is my initial understanding of how this works. You're basically saying, I want to pass every single event. Okay, so I created this all events trigger type custom, and it fires on every single event. So this is, by this definition, events could be anything. They could be page views, transactions, whatever. And you'll see if I remove this tag. So let's say we've just got this tag now, but it's got no trigger, so it's never going to fire. If I preview this, just let this clear, I'm going to refresh this page again, and you should see, even though the GTM, the client-side GTM is firing this stuff into the server-side GTM, because we haven't got that rule enabled, nothing will be sent on to downstream. And you can see here, we've got the events coming in. I can see those page views. Again, I'll do it again. Let's refresh that. Have a look here. We should see, there we go, page view and viewed product list coming in. But nothing has been sent downstream. Okay, so in order to do that, you have to create something like this, an all events. You have to create some sort of rule, just like you would in standard GTM, to dictate where you pass this information on to. Okay, so I'll enable that, preview this again. And now you'll see that when we refresh this, not only do we get the things here, but it shows you that this all events tag has fired. And you might be wondering, well, how does this tag know where, how does the server-side container know where to route this data to? That is all still coming from the client-side container, right? Because the client-side container is basically just sending this massive request from the GTM container, server-side, the client-side container. This one is the thing where we've got which GA account or GA property we want to send the data to, and this client-side container is the thing that's forming the Google Analytics URL. For those who don't know, that is the request that normally gets sent from the browser to Google. But all that's happening is the client side is sending it to our server-side GTM container, and then the server-side GTM container is simply routing it on. It's not changing it, it's not doing anything to it, it's simply routing it on to Google Analytics, server to server. And you can see we've already got the GA property ID in here. It's not sticking out to me at the moment, but it will, trust me, it will be in there. And so that's how it knows where to send the data to. Now, what's also interesting is that there is another type of tag in the server-side container called HTTP requests. So in theory, what we could do is we could have something so that whenever an event comes in, whenever any sort of event comes in, we could send a ping to any destination URL. So I think this is the sort of the start of where I would see Google trying to allow us to call downstream other marketing tech or other products that have the ability to post data to them. Now this could be an API call. We could potentially make an API call somewhere to send this data on. Maybe your CRM system has that ability. So that's quite a cool feature. Again, this is kind of, Google seems to be moving into more of the customer data platform space a little bit with this. But also not really, because we're not talking about customer data and PII here. Google probably wouldn't let you put PII through this system. So it's more just, I can see it going to a place where it allows you to deploy marketing technology on the sites quite quickly, which is one thing that CDPs do. But they're not doing the unification and the activation, the audience building in here, which is another feature that a CDP would have, but GTM doesn't. Now I'm imagining, let's say that we wanted to pass all information on, but we didn't want to, or we only wanted to pass a particular event on. So let's say we only wanted to call, if this event viewed product list happens, we only want to send that particular event downstream. Well, I suppose I could create a new trigger here. So I'd do this, viewed product list, and tag configuration would be Universal Analytics. And the triggering would be, well, the event we want to fire it on. Again, this is just the naming convention I use, you don't have to use it. Event name contains viewed product list. All right, so we've now got, we've almost got two tags here. Now, probably what's going to happen is this is going to fire twice, okay? So we're going to get, let's call this GA, so we know that it's going to there. Now what's going to happen is basically when the viewed product list event comes in, it's going to match both of these. So it's going to match the all events trigger and this one. So I would actually expect us to see two viewed product list events come in to GA. So let's test that. Let's see if that happens. So let's preview it. Here we go, nothing evaluated yet. Let's refresh this page and let's have a watch down here. So we've got no events. Let's look for a spike here coming in of two events. There we go, exactly two, and you can see we got two events in there, and this jumped up from 7 to 9. So viewed product list got sent in twice, and I can imagine people setting this up for the first time are gonna get potentially confused as to why this is. So I suspect that you'll have to put some thought into creating these firing triggers, because well, I'm guessing normally you just want to route everything straight through, right? So everything that comes in from the container one would go into GA. So I'd probably just have this one enabled. And then if ever we wanted to do something clever, like maybe for this particular one, this is the one where we want to send just this particular let's say we just wanted to send this view product list to app and web but nothing else, we could do it like that. Or if we just wanted to trigger a particular post request to our CRM or whatever, then we would put in our API URL here. So that's something we could potentially do. So let's have a look at some of the other features of the debugger in the server-side GTM. So looking around, we've got incoming URL. We can see all the variables, which could be handy for debugging. We've got kind of all the data about App Engine. You probably won't have to worry too much about that. That's just our App Engine running in the background. Under tags, this is the tags that have been triggered, kind of like we'd see in the traditional GTM. And we can see where our data is sent to. All right, so it's going out to here. Variables, we can see what different variables are set to. This is just like the classic GTM variables tab, I guess, that you would see here. Nothing much different there. Event data, this is useful, I guess. So this is data coming in. I can have a quick look at some information there that has come in. Again, nothing particularly exciting, but be useful for debugging. Notice how we've tagged, it seemed to have tagged on x-ga MPL to the front of what would traditionally be the GTM parameter or the GA parameter. So in this case, this is list name, list, product 1 in list, brand, product 1 in list, category, so on. They've just they've tagged this prefix to all of the stuff. But if ever data was not quite getting into GA the way I was expecting it, I would have to look here. And this does bring up one issue that I can see people facing is now you've got to debug in two places. Not only do you have to debug your server-side container to make sure that the data in the server-side container is accurate, you then have to debug it in the, this is the client side. You've got to debug it in the client-side container to make sure the data is being sent to the server-side container correctly, so you might want to do some bugging in here. And then finally, you've got to do debugging in the actual GA account to make sure it all got through. The other difficulty I can see is that tools like Omnibug, which I've traditionally relied on to get an understanding of what's going on and what's being sent to GA, no longer work. All we're going to see is the Tag Manager container loading. And if you're used to doing something like searching for collect, which a lot of us used to do before we had tools like Omnibug, and still do actually for manual debugging, you would look for the word collect and try and find it in here, and to debug the request going off to Google Analytics. Now that's no longer the case. So actually, I should have been on image there. So actually, you can probably ignore me there. You can ignore me entirely. That was total bullshit. Well, it's not bullshit in that it's not appearing here. It's not appearing in Omnibug, but you can still get access to it here. The only difference you can see is rather than it going to what was traditionally googleanalytics.com/collect, we're now sending it to our custom App Engine server that's running. But everything else is the same, so we can actually debug fairly easily here. I suspect people, the people who make Omnibug, maybe there's a setting we can change in here, probably is actually, but they are going to have to slightly upgrade their tool to look for, well, they're going to have to upgrade it to allow us to look for this AppSpot domain, and potentially our own domain if we change it to analytics.rdomain.com as well. So I can see that catching people out. So yeah, moral of the story, a few more ways to debug that we may have to do. So I now want to see if this is going to have an impact on ITP at all, and how actually Google is identifying us. Now we've got a CID here, and the CID, for those who I'm sure are familiar with GA, is our cookie ID. It's our client ID. It's the thing that represents this browser. It's how Google knows when this data hits our server that we are the same person as I go from page to page. And this CID is still set by the browser. Okay, it's still being passed in this request URL, and it's still going to the server, and the server's not changing it, it's not adding to it, it's not doing anything like that. So to me, it doesn't seem like this server-side tracking would affect ITP at all. All right, so I've cleared all my cookies. I'm going to refresh this page, and I can see my data flying off, and we've got this client ID ending 6435. 6435. Let's look in the debugger. So this is what has come in. We've got, again, 6435, so it has picked it up correctly, 6435. Great. Interesting that it's also got this at the beginning. Again, I don't know if that is, if it's tried to identify me in some other way, or that's just a hash of the first pass of my client ID. I don't know at this point. But all I know is that the server-side GTM container sees me as this person 6435. Okay, and there it's got the full client ID here. And notice it's put JS, so this is obviously knowing it's coming from the front end JS JavaScript. So let's clear the cookie again. Let's go back into application, and let's clear this GA cookie. I've got a couple of them here. One is Tag Manager, and one is this one, 635. This is our one. Let's delete that. I've got a GA ID as well. I'm going to get rid of that one. just so that everything is gone. Those are just auth cookies, that should be all right. And let's refresh this and see what happens. Okay, so I'm getting the events fired again. I should have got a totally new client ID. And there we have, we've got a new client ID ending 6580 this time. So let's have a look here, and this has picked it up, 6580, 6580. So far, there's no stitching going on. This is not, by my reckoning, a magical solution to ITP and cookies being deleted after a day. As you've seen, if I delete my cookies, the front end is still the thing that's giving me my client ID. And that client ID changes if I delete my cookies. And that is the thing that's just being passed straight on from the client side to the server side and then on to GA. So GA, Google Analytics, will still see this as two different users with two separate cookie IDs. Now, you can even see like this number at the beginning is totally different as well. So it doesn't appear that they're doing anything clever, like, I don't know, using my user agent information, GTM version or anything like that to kind of predict who I am and stitch it together. So server-side tracking as a way of getting around ITP, I don't see it from what I've seen so far. I think we're still stuck with that issue. So if I have to give my summary of what I've seen in literally, I don't know, an hour of playing around with server-side tracking so far, is I think it is moving in the right direction. I think it is a benefit. I think it will potentially minimize load times of websites, which is important for SEO purposes and just general user experience on the website. So that's great news. I think it will overcome some of the issues of ITP. And by some of the issues, I mean if ad blockers have put in place specific blockers to specific domains such as google-analytics.com, which is where the old requests used to be sent to, that will no longer be the case, because again, you're setting up your analytics server on something like analytics.yourdomain.com, and the ad blocker can't block that. So in theory, we should be able to track more people than we are before. However, it doesn't solve the issue of, from what I've seen so far, of clearing cookies. If you have a browser that clears your cookies after a day, or they expire after a day, then there's still no way of knowing if you come back to the site a day later. Google Analytics will still assign you a new cookie ID because the cookie IDs are still being assigned on the client side. And that's not changed with server-side tracking at all. So that will still be an issue. In terms of debugging, there is an extra level of complexity here now, because not only do you have to debug the client-side GTM, but you also have to potentially debug and add in routes in the server-side GTM. But for simple sites, this should be very simple. It should be almost setting up one tag and just passing everything through to your downstream server. So another downside I can see is cost. There's essentially a free tier where you can, for a small website, you just can have a single server running that is passing the data through in the server side. But as your site grows, or you exceed, as they say here, the limits, if you've got a large website, then you're going to have to expect to start to pay for the running costs of App Engine. And they say here it's going to be about $30 to $50 per server per month, but they don't really say how many servers you need or what they mean by a lot of traffic. So I suspect that some of the big clients that I work with, they're going to be spending a lot more than that on the servers. But you know, in the grand scheme of things, if they get a performance boost in the front end and they're accurately able to track a few more people, then I think that would be a benefit. And I'm sure there's other benefits coming on in the future, such as being able to send data to other downstream tools, not just to Google Analytics. I suspect there will be a debate at some point. Again, I'm very much in favor of customer data platforms. Customer data platforms do this already, right? Something like Segment, Exponia, Relay42, these big CDP platforms, they do this. They've been doing server-side tracking for years now. They're very good at it. They know what they're doing. And GTM is now starting to encroach on that market, it looks like. I don't see, as I've said before, I don't see them ever fully going into the CDP route just because of PII. Google is very adverse to handling PII, but a customer data platform by its very nature has to track PII. So I'm super excited to see where this goes in the future. I hope that very, very quick walkthrough has given you some insight into the kind of things you may need to think about when you're setting this up. As you can see, I've never used this before, and within an hour I've been able to get it up and running. So it should be absolutely straightforward for you to do it, and I hope you found this useful. So good luck.